Welcome to the Sharp Angles Betting and DFS Show. My name is Tod Burros, and I am your host. And I'm joined once again by my partner, Ryan McCrystal, and we will go over the Thursday night game, which is about an hour away, Ryan's props for the rest of the week, and some DFS idea concepts I'm looking at early in the week when you consider early ownership on a really interesting slate. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to remind you that you can get access to all our fantasy content, including insights, props, worksheets, and more by taking advantage of our fantasy package available on the Sharp Football website. Right now, we're running a special offer for all listeners. Use the code ANGLES for 15% off any fantasy package. The 15% discount also extends to every package site-wide. Check it out in the podcast description or use the code ANGLES during checkout on the purchase page of the Sharp Football website. Also, if you wouldn't mind doing us a favor and subscribing to our YouTube channel, following along and giving us a nice review wherever you listen to podcasts, we would really appreciate it. And now, my favorite time of every week, the time when I bring Ryan McCrystal in. Ryan, how are you this week?
I'm doing pretty well, although I certainly wish we had a better Thursday night game to look forward to.
I don't know if I could bear it.
I was going to make the case that this might be the worst primetime game in NFL history, because normally, even if you have two bad teams, there's, draft slots available, right? But since the Bears own the Panthers pick, it doesn't matter. Nothing about this game matters to anybody.
Yeah, other than my pun, Bajent Orange instead of Agent Orange. Yeah. All right. Well, bad puns, bad game. I mean, we're off to a great start. Ryan, how did you do last week, and where does that leave you on the season?
I did okay last week. Went 3-3, broke even. We're 24-20 on the year with our props. Last week, sort of a tough break with Josh Downs. That was one of the ones we lost. He got hurt at practice during the week, and then he exited the game early. So we're betting the over on his receptions as we had for a while. So that was a loss last week, and because he's banged up, uncertain status.
Did you pull it or did you bet on it?
We talked about it on the podcast. We didn't address the injury. So if you bet it early when we were talking about it, that ended up being a loss. If you were lucky enough to stay away from it, then
I was trying to get you. I was trying to get you to 19. So that leads us to tonight's game and tonight's prop. What do you got for us?
Yeah, for my prop tonight, I'm going to be on the under on Miles Sanders' longest rush. This is available at 9.5 yards at BetMGM. It's 8.5 elsewhere, but shop around, because that 9.5, when you're dealing with these really low numbers, 1 yard could be pretty meaningful. There's a chance that he gets a little bit more of a workload this week. He's getting back closer to full strength, we would assume, but he's obviously sharing touches with Chuba Hubbard. They've mentioned that they want Raheem Blackshear to be involved in the offense a little bit also. So you've kind of got, three guys vying for carries, and they're all going up against a really good Bears run defense. They're contacting running backs at or behind the line of scrimmage on 49% of attempts this season. So there's not a ton of running room that they're going to have. And, this obviously is a game that, the Bears are certainly capable of, pulling away from the Packers, I would think, if things go well for them on defense. So that could also just diminish the carries. If there's only 12, let's say there's 12 to 15 carries to go around amongst those three guys, he's going to need to, there's just limited opportunities for him to hit the over. And with this being a good defense, I think the under is the way to go.
I've always been a big guy for names. And when I hear Raheem Blackshear, I think of like a winger in soccer. Really fast up the wing, good at crossing. But I digress. My prop last week, I took two Will Levis props, and it was interesting because we got the harder one, the over on the yardage, but the over on his rushing yards I didn't get. That leaves me at 5-3 for the year. My prop for tonight is Chuba Hubbard. I'm going to go over his 2.5 receptions. Hubbard has turned into more of a lead back on the field more, caught 4 balls last week. And like you mentioned, the Bears have been surprisingly tough against the run. So I think they may look to use him as a receiver more. And this is one of my favorite ones that I've done for the year. I really liked over 2.5 receptions when I saw it today on Underdog. Your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I definitely lean over at that one. I was kind of considering the over for receptions for both him and Miles Sanders. I ended up staying away from it just because with 3 guys in the mix for touches in the backfield, I just wasn't quite confident enough how those are going to get broken down, especially because early in the year, Sanders was pretty involved in the passing game. And so if he's getting closer to full strength, does he take away some of Chuba Hubbard's opportunities in the passing game? That's possible. So totally with you on the logic. The only reason I stayed away was just that uncertainty.
Yeah. So every week when the game is, at least close enough to make it worth who's going to win. Last week, I not only got it right, and I evened up against you because you had taken me down a couple weeks earlier on a game, and I kind of evened up and not only got the Steelers over Tennessee, but I said 20-17. It turned out to be 20-16. There was no great rationale for me going that score other than you saying 17-14 Titans. So I went 2017, but it was funny that it went that way. Who do you like tonight, Ryan?
I like the Bears. I think they take care of business with a strong defense that's probably going to cause some problems for the run game, like I talked about, probably cause some problems for Bryce Young. So I'm going to take the Bears 17-13.
All right. Well, we're not going to go, I could go different just to be, make it more interesting, but I'm with you. I'm going to go 24-14. I think that Bajent he's really shown something at times. I think he could hang around as a backup in this league for quite a while. I think he's been certainly better than a few starters that we've seen this year, including last week's starter, Kenny Pickett. Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. Your thoughts on Bajent? You agree that he might be a guy who can hang around this league?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like the moment isn't too big for him. That's obviously a huge leap to jump up from Shepherd to the NFL and to step right into a starting role so early. So, that's got to increase your confidence in him. Whatever the Bears liked about him as a prospect, seeing how he's handled this moment only makes you feel better about it.
If you want to go to an ATM this week and take out money, put it on Etienne. Travis Etienne, Ryan, is the first on your list of Sunday props.
Yeah, I'm going to be on the over on Etienne's receiving yards. It's available at 22.5 yards against the 49ers. This is a pretty low number for him. He's cleared this number in 6 of 8 games. I suppose it's low because of the 49ers have a good defense, but he doesn't need a huge volume to hit this number because of how explosive he is. And he's had 3 or more receptions in all but 1 game. And that's why he's clearing this number so easily, because he's not one of these just purely check down receivers that you're just, dumping off to the last second. He's really he doesn't see a huge volume, but when he gets the ball, it's intentional. They're looking for explosive plays out of him. So, 37% of his catches this year have produced 10 or more yards. He's had a 15-yard reception or longer in half of his games this year. So he's making big plays. And with the line only at 22.5 yards, that could be 2 receptions easily from him with the rate that he's turning out big plays. And even against a good defense, that's very doable for him. So, just one last factor in this is with the Jaguars as underdogs in this game, if the 49ers do get out to a lead at some point, if the second half they're throwing more, we could certainly have, game flow go in our direction here to increase their passing opportunities. I just think that's a lot of factors all trending in the same way. So taking the over on Etienne's receiving yards is one of my favorite props this week.
His coach is the Pitts. He's played at times like the Pitts. His name is the Pitts, but you like his receptions over this week Kyle Pitts. Do you think it has something to do with Arthur Smith shaving the mustache? Is that part of the equation here? Let us know, Ryan.
You're really getting into midseason form with these bad puns, aren't you?
I did not get as much of a nap as I had hoped, and it is showing.
All right. Well, Kyle Pitts, longest reception over is one of my props this week. Have not seen a line posted for this. I'll take the over at 19.5 yards or lower. It's typically been lower than that this season, so it'll likely be a playable prop for us. Mostly based on Arizona's defense. We played Amari Cooper's longest reception over against them last week and won very easily. He had a couple of huge plays down the field. The reason behind it is they just cannot defend downfield. On throws 15 or more yards downfield, Arizona is allowing a 64% completion rate. That is dead last. Average is 43%. So they're 21 percentage points worse than average. Just stunning how bad they've been. Now, obviously, this isn't a great passing offense, but when you're that bad, when you're that far below average, pretty much anybody is capable of beating you down the field. And, I'm going with Pitts for this prop rather than some of the others receivers because he is their most targeted receiver downfield. 29% of Atlanta's throws of 15 or more yards have been targeted at Pitt. It's not a huge share, not the same share that we had with Cooper last week, but he is their most targeted receiver. And I think that there might actually be a little bit of added value here with Taylor Heineke starting again, because he is, I think we talked about this on the podcast last week a little bit, how aggressive he is throwing downfield relative to Desmond Ridder. He isn't great at throwing downfield, but he's fearless at throwing downfield. And so on a longest reception prop, we don't need to be good. We just need one of these, we just need one completion, right? So the fact that he's throwing downfield so often, I think that bodes well for us. Last week, 32% of Heineke's throws were 15 or more yards downfield. Ridder has never hit that in his, like 3/4 of a season in total of starting for the Falcons. And Ritter's season average was just 19%. So not even close to what we've seen from Heineke. So Heineke might be terrible, but like I said, we only need one play on this prop. And so the rate that he's throwing downfield, I think Pitts gets a few opportunities to hit this. And I feel pretty good about getting it based on Arizona's defense being so poor.
I think it's a very interesting one. Our next guy, 2 weeks ago, he went nuclear. Last week, he did not go nuclear. But this week, you think DeAndre Hopkins is very likely to hit over on his longest reception. And I think with Will Levis and a better matchup than he had last week, this is, I think, my favorite of the ones, even though it's not the play has more ceiling than floor, but I really like this one, Ryan.
Yeah, well, I'm right there with you. This is definitely my favorite prop of the week. I think unless we see a drastically different performance from the Titans offense this week, this is probably a prop that we're going to revisit a few times over the next couple of weeks, at least until defenses adjust to what the Titans offense looks like with Levis. He's just so much more aggressive and throwing the ball downfield at such a high rate that this is a fairly obvious prop, I would think. His longest reception is available at 23.5 yards. And just the rate at which Levis is throwing downfield, we're in great shape here. 34% of his attempts have been 15 or more yards downfield. Basically, 1 out of every 3 attempts, he's chucking it downfield. And that's 10 percentage points more than any other quarterback this season. So he's just on another planet in terms of how he's attacking defenses. I'm sure some of it is him going rogue a little bit, because I don't think you would design this. You would ask your rookie to step in his first or second start and throw down a field at such a high rate. So maybe they try to get him to dial it back a bit. Something we'll have to monitor over these next couple of weeks, but clearly he's comfortable doing it. So I think at least at this point, we got to continue to bet on it continuing to happen. And, obviously Hopkins is going to be the most targeted guy. He's seen 8 targets at 15 or more yards downfield from Levis. That's 4 per game in his 2 starts. He's only averaging 2.5 downfield targets from Tannehill. So he's seen a nice jump. With him getting this many opportunities against a bad Bucs defense, the odds of him coming down with one of those catches and picking up a couple of yards after the catch to hit the over here seems like it's fairly likely. And like I said, this is a really bad Bucks secondary, they're allowing 20 or more yards on 10% of pass plays. That's the second worst rate in the league. So we've got a really aggressive quarterback going up against a bad defense that's giving up a lot of big plays. This is a great pairing. I also want to mention, although I'm not officially going to recommend it, I think you could absolutely justify playing the longest reception over for Nick Westbrook-Akine also. That number is available at only 15.5 yards. And it's a little risky because he doesn't play a huge role in the offense. In fact, he only has one catch in each of Levis's 2 starts, but both of those catches were over 20 yards. So he's hit the over on his longest reception each of the last 2 weeks. In fact, Hopkins, Westbrook-Akine, and Treylon Burks combined, their longest reception over is 5-1 in Levis's 2 starts. Now, Burks is dealing with a concussion, so there's no line available for him. But, maybe you want to monitor that over the next couple of days. If Burks is out, that would probably increase our confidence in Westbrook-Akine because it would mean potentially more targets for him. And obviously, he's going to get downfield opportunities as well. So if we think an increased workload for him, that if there's no Burks, that could emerge as a really strong play as well.
Yeah, especially if you can get it now. I read that Burks is looking kind of doubtful for this week. We've seen very, very few people get out of the concussion protocol in 1 week. And Brock Purdy was already practicing by now and looking very, very likely to play. I didn't see whether Burks was back on the field today. I think Westbrook-Akine is, if you can get it now, is a really, really interesting play. Let's move on to your next one, which is elementary. Deshaun Watson's longest completion under. There's no way to massage just how bad Deshaun Watson has been this year. The facts are the facts. He honestly looks at times like he doesn't want to be out there. He's not accurate. And he, with that shoulder injury, I think this is a very interesting one, Ryan. And at least I didn't use any puns on this one.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be on the under on his longest completion, as you alluded to. Or I should say I will probably be on the under. I wrote down that I wanted to take this line if it was at 32.5 or higher. It's actually available at 31.5, so a little bit lower than I wanted it. So I just to stick to my process, I try to not bend when I set a line like that for myself, and it doesn't quite match. So if that's the only place that it's available, maybe I don't take it, but certainly shop around as it becomes available at more sports books over the next 24 hours or so. There's usually a yard or two difference on these props in different places. So we might be able to find it at that 32.5 or higher. So if it's there, I like it. And it's mostly about the Ravens, really, because obviously last week when they played the Cardinals and we took that Amari Cooper prop, we were expecting some big plays from the offense, and the Browns delivered. The Ravens, man, they've just been so stingy giving up big plays in the passing game. Just, to go over some numbers on their defense giving up big plays, they've given up 10 or more yards on 18% of pass plays. That's the lowest rate in the league. 20 or more yards on 5%, third lowest rate in the league, and 30 or more yards on just 2%. The lowest rate in the league. So at all levels, they've been incredibly stingy. So this is going to be tough under any circumstances for really any quarterback wide receiver combination, especially for Watson, who has been shaky at times this season and doesn't have although Cooper's a very good receiver, they don't really have that true explosive downfield weapon. And the Browns are also dealing with a ton of injuries on the offensive line, which could make protecting Watson harder and giving him less time to attack downfield. Obviously, they've already been without their right tackle, Jack Conklin. They've had rookie DeJuan Jones filling in for him. Then last week, they lose Jedrick Wills. That forced James Hudson into action. Now, Wills has been terrible, so you might think that's not a huge loss. He ranks 33rd among left tackles in pressure rate allowed at 9.5%. But James Hudson, in his career, when he's lined up at left tackle, has allowed a 22% pressure rate. So he is truly terrible. As bad as you think Wills has been, it can get worse. And to make matters even more complicated, DeJuan Jones, who's been playing at right tackle and doing pretty well for a rookie, forced into action unexpectedly, he has not practiced this week. So they've called up journeyman Jaron Christian to the active roster. He hasn't started a game since 2021 with the Texans. So this is going to be a very patchwork Browns offensive line, it looks like, against one of the better defenses in the league. So I think they're going to have a really hard time buying enough time for Watson to even get off passes downfield. And then even when he does, it's going to be hard to complete those plays. So the under on Watson's longest completion looks good. Like I said, I hope that we're able to find it at 32 yards or higher. But if you're looking for action on this game and you want to play it at 31, obviously I still very much lean under at that number.
If I'm not mistaken, and this kind of goes to the change in the Raiders' coaching philosophy, everything, including quarterback, my memory is that you had a few Josh Jacobs unders for rushing yards early in the season. I really like this Josh Jacobs receiving yards over. We've seen AOC, Aiden O'Connell, target Josh Jacobs. He is a core player for them. And you like the over for his receiving yards.
Yeah, I do. This line's available at 19.5 yards. I think that's a great number. I was willing to bet it up to 23.5. So we got a really good line for us here. I think we've really benefited from sort of some fluky scheduling quirks that I'll get into in a second. But I'm interested in this mostly because of the Jets defense, actually, because one of the trends I've been following lately is playing running back receptions or receiving yards overs against teams that don't blitz a lot. Because for most offenses, has a really huge impact on how often the running backs are involved in the passing game. Obviously, it's a common check at the line of scrimmage. If the quarterback thinks that there's, if the defense is showing blitz, you got to adjust your protection, have a running back stay in as opposed to running a route to help out. So that obviously diminishes their workload in the passing game. That's certainly been the case for the Raiders this season. Jacobs has seen a 6% target share against the blitz, 19% on non-blitzes. So he is playing a big role on non-blitzes, and the Jets blitz at the second lowest rate in the league, only 16%. So that bodes well for Jacobs to be pretty involved. Now, you might be concerned betting on his receiving yards because Jacobs has not really produced in that area this season, and this is where the fluky schedule sort of comes into play. He's been held to 20 or fewer yards 5 times this season, but 4 of those 5 games against the Giants, Steelers, Packers, and Patriots, those 4 teams, they rank in the top 6 in the league in blitz rate. So this has been sort of just a crazy fluke in the schedule where the Raiders, the front half of their schedule was jam-packed with these teams that blitz a ton. And so Jacobs has been sort of out of the mix in the passing game in quite a few of those games. Now, when he faces a team other than that group, so any defense that ranks 7th or lower in blitz rate, he's gone over 20 yards in 4 of those 5 games. And with this line at 19.5, that's a pivotal number for us. So seeing as how he's been a big factor in the passing game against everybody else that blitzes at either a average or below average rate, and we've got the Jets who blitz at the second lowest rate in the league, this is a great spot for Jacobs. And I think we should expect a much more involved Jacobs in the passing game than we've seen almost at any point this season.
Yeah. And when you think about it, the Jets are one of the reasons they don't blitz a lot is they don't need to. Yeah. They get a lot of pressure out of that front. And you get a rookie quarterback being pressured. He's going to dump the ball off. Especially, he's already shown a predication to do that. So I like that one, Ryan.
Yeah, I think we've got a bunch of good ones this week, a lot of really good matchups. That wraps up everything for my props. So, Todd, let's jump into DFS and start with the quarterbacks. It's another tough week for us this week with Mahomes, Tua, and Hurts all on buys. So we've got the scrap heap left over. Where are you going this week, Todd?
Well, I just want to reiterate how early things are for DFS on a Thursday. I think if I could give you any advice, it is to, I've started to all the more kind of give you not I like this guy, I don't like this guy, but the thought processes of when I would like, similar to what Ryan does with props. If I can get it here, if I can get it there. Right now at quarterback, Joe Burrow is 6,800 and showing 18% ownership, which is more ownership than we've seen on pretty much any quarterback this year. If it stays this high versus Houston with Higgins looking out and Chase looking I think Chase will, rubber to the road is going to play, but he's not going to be at 100%. I'm going to struggle to play an 18% quarterback who can't run, not at the highest salary, but at a pretty good salary. I have trouble with that one. Brock Purdy is next at 13%. Again, another tough one. He has not been running good lately, had a few bad weeks. 5,700 at 13%. Is he a good play because he's a good play? I mean, is he has ownership because he's a great play, or because he's the best play on an average, on a not very good slate? The third highest chalk I'm also not thrilled about. Geno has been bad lately also. I mean, they were awful last week. Now, a lot of that was the Ravens. So the chalk to me right now isn't great. I know the matchup for Geno is a great matchup, but him in double digits, it just isn't appealing to me. So who are a couple guys that I'm looking at? Will Levis, you talked about his predication for going deep. I've used the word predication twice in one show. There's got to be some kind of penalty for that. I apologize. He is showing absolutely no ownership against, again, as Ryan mentioned, a terrible Tampa pass D. Justin Herbert is projecting terrible at 7,700, but 1% against Detroit, which I won't call paper tigers. I was reading something on ETR about that. But they can still be beat. And that's just a straight, well, what if Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen get it going again? I don't mind mixing in Quentin Johnston because people aren't going to want to play him. Lamar has no ownership at AK versus Cleveland. Great defense, but we've seen Lamar do well. A couple other names I'll throw out there. I like Josh Dobbs. Right now he's at 5,500 and 6.3% versus New Orleans, who's gotten gashed a few times lately. And you get running with Dobbs. I think he's going to get steamed up. Wouldn't shock me if he's 10% projected on Sunday. But if he stays at 6%, I could see myself, it's a good offense, a lot of good weapons. And while Geno picking on the Redskins looks good, I kind of like Sam Howell, and we'll get to that a little bit more with his wide receivers, but he's not showing a lot of ownership right now, and he's put up good fantasy football weeks almost every week. And then, Ryan, I kind of want your thoughts on Kyler Murray at 5,900 with 3% ownership right now, with these not dreadful, but really unappealing choices. I could see people start galaxy braining themselves into Kyler, even though historically people want to see the injured guy come back for a week and play good. What's your thoughts on Kyler and some of these other options I've thrown out there?
Yeah, well, with Kyler, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to use him in this situation, at least until we've seen him back. And it's not even so much about seeing him; it's just about him getting back on the field and getting comfortable again. You need some run game production from him if you're going to hit the ceiling on his fantasy output. Last year, 3 of his 4 highest scoring weeks came when he scored a rushing touchdown. And in this game, I mean, they're not going to use him on a QB sneak. They're not going to, purposely put him in any sort of situation where he could get hurt again. He's probably going to be a little bit apprehensive about taking off on his own. So I wouldn't really expect I don't think the odds of him reaching the end zone on the ground are very good at all. And he's probably not going to take off. I mean, he may not run at all in this game unless he just has a wide open lane to pick up, a few yards on like a key third down or something like that. So with him probably getting you close to 0 from his rushing output, it seems like a bad situation, especially against the Falcons, because Arthur Smith, we know what his strategy is. He wants to bleed the clock. Like he wants to be the Iowa of the NFL.
They've been playing fast though the last couple of weeks. I've been reading Pat Thorman's stuff, and for some reason they've been playing much faster the last couple of weeks.
It goes up and down, but I mean, he's openly talked about the strategy is to play slower, run the ball a ton, and to have a chance in the second half. And so they're going to be able to do that against the Cardinals, right? Like this, there's no reason to. You don't have to play fast and throw the ball around. You can just keep running it down the field and mix in some pass plays here and there. You let Heineke take a few shots here and there. So, I think that this. I just think this is a really bad spot between potentially having fewer possessions in this game and not getting any run game production from Kyler. It looks like a bad spot. As for the other guys you mentioned,
I agree. By the way, I was just playing devil's advocate a little bit. For exactly the reasons you laid out.
Yep. Yeah, it's a bad spot. It's a good opportunity. Other people are going to make that mistake because there's going to be a handful of people that are going to be excited about the opportunity to use them again, right? Like that always boosts someone's roster share when they're coming back because there is a little bit of excitement from certain people. For the other guys you mentioned, I love Levis. I mean, has a lower salary than Kyler and a much higher ceiling, I think, with what we've seen from him attacking downfield and going up against a really bad Bucs defense, like we already talked about. And I think that, you could certainly stack this. Like we talked about his receivers. We'll get to it later, but you could certainly use Levis and mix in some of his receivers to create a unique lineup with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's my favorite right now. I was just going to check back because I check in the morning on ownership, to get ready for the show. He's still under 1% ownership right now on one site. Let me see if the other site that I use has ownership up yet.
I mean, almost any quarterback going up against the Bucs should have a higher share than that, right? And
I think he definitely will, especially when we get to wide receiver and I go over the price of Hopkins. But I want to see if this other site loads and what the ownership is on Levis.
The other one,
they also have him down around 2%. So
yeah,
I expect that to change, Ryan. If this was Saturday night and everything I know stays the same, I could see myself being 10-15% Levis and just hoping.
Yeah, I think that's totally justified given how often he throws downfield. If he hits a few long touchdown passes, he could have a huge week for sure. All right, let's jump over to the running backs. Obviously, we've got quite a bit of chalk emerging at this position. So are you going to go with the chalk this week, or do you think you're going to go looking for some values?
I mean, right now, I love Tony Pollard as much as anybody, but I mean, he hasn't been Tony Pollard this year. And that's exacerbated by the fact that they keep putting him in. They're not giving him the high leverage touches that he turned into touchdowns in years past. So right now he's looking at about 30%, Bijan and Mixon in the high 20s. I mean, no, the Giants, it's just such an obvious spot versus the Giants. But if they, get off to a big lead, it could be Rico Dowdle. Who gets the 2 touchdowns. So I don't think at 7,300, if he was 6,000, yes, I would go nuts on Pollard possibly and go over on the chalk. But at 7,300, no. Bijan 6,000, Mixon in the sixes still. I mean, Arthur Smith is so stubborn. You would think after everything that happened this week that this would be Bijan week. And it could happen, but how many times do you have to play it into 25% ownership and get, and sit there and just see Tyler Algier? And I mean, last week, Jonnu Smith got a goal line carry and Bijan didn't. So none of those guys really interest me. A couple guys that I'm looking at that are really low owned right now. James Conner coming back from injury. You mentioned the likelihood that Kyler plays it safe week 1. We've seen Conner have just a huge workload. I find it hard to believe he's going to stay at 4% because if it's that obvious to me, I always think, well, it's going to be obvious to the field. But at 5,900 and 4% ownership, James Conner, I like both Gibbs and Montgomery if Montgomery comes back. I think what's going to happen is the fear and the unknown is going to keep playing people from playing either, which is going to make me want to be over on both. And the cheapie that I really like this week, and again, I mean, I'm just shocked at the early ownership. Zach Charbonnet, 4,200 in low ownership. It's a good matchup. At worst, it looks like he's in a 50-50 right now with Kenneth Walker. I like those three, Ryan. And then also Christian McCaffrey. Anytime Christian McCaffrey is at 11%, I'm going to want to be 2x, maybe 3x. He's one of the few running backs that can just absolutely break the slate wide open. And I think that ownership is too low. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, of the guys that you've talked about, the one that really jumps out to me is Bijan, and I think I'm with you on that, with him being a risky play this week. The other reason he's risky is you want some pass game opportunities with him, right? And we talked about how a low blitz rate is going to get your running backs more involved in the passing game. The Bucs are near the top of the league, and so that's going to limit his opportunities. And we also talked about Heineke throwing downfield more often than Ritter did. He's less likely to have some of those check down opportunities that he would get from Ritter. So that's kind of a tricky spot for him too. I think he looks like one of the riskiest plays on the slate this week.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was a kid, we used to play games like Stratomatic and those kind of dice and card football games. And always the way to beat the blitz was with a screen pass. And so, it's just kind of funny to me that it's kind of turned around. And I don't know if it's because teams don't do the screens properly against the blitz anymore. But historically, the way to beat the blitz was with a draw and with a screen. And you just don't see it much anymore.
Yeah, well, you can certainly mix it in, but you have to pick your spots, right? So a lot of times,
I'm not playing mixing. Oh, sorry, mix it in.
Yeah, you got to pick your spots, right? So if you're playing a team that's blitzing, 40% of the time, you're not going to call screens 40% of the time, right? You're going to mix it in and try to gash them on a big play, maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the course of the game. But on some of these teams that are blitzing 40% of the time, there's a hand. I think I don't have the Bucs number right in front of me, but it's 35% of the time blitz rate for the Bucs. So you're not calling a screen to Bijan 35% of the time. You're going to mix it in for sure, because it is definitely a way to beat the blitz and try to keep them honest. But oftentimes you're going to have to adjust at the line of scrimmage if you think a blitz is coming, and that's going to take the running back out of the game.
Yeah, one more question I have for you. Jaylen Warren at 5,007% ownership. Rational coaching would say that Jaylen Warren is going to get the ball more. The Steelers have not been very rational, though.
Yeah, this is a tough spot as well, because it looks like it's probably a good spot for the Steelers. If they want to keep him heavily involved in the run game, they could certainly justify giving him a good workload. But like you said, I don't know that we can trust that. I certainly don't. I certainly don't trust that he's going to get 15 to 18 carries or something like that would make him a viable fantasy option based on run game usage alone, right? They haven't shown that a willingness to do that much. Also, similar conversation to what we just had about Bijan. You want his passing volume to be a factor. And unfortunately, Green Bay is also a team that blitzes a lot. They actually blitz at the 4th highest rate in the league. So, that was a big reason why last week on Thursday Night Football, this was my prop, was the over on Jaylen Warren's receiving yards. We ended up winning, and a big part of that was the Titans have a very low blitz rate. So it was easier to bet on him being heavily involved. That might not happen against Green Bay, given the rate that they blitz. So we obviously have uncertainty with how carries are going to get split up, and we think that he might have less of a pass game role in this particular matchup. So yeah, I would suggest having less of Jaylen Warren this week than in other matchups.
Yeah, I was not leaning that way.
All right, well, that wraps up running backs for us. Let's jump over to wide receivers. Who are you targeting?
The chalk right now is falling on Jamar Chase, and couple other guys, Hollywood Brown in Kyler's first game back at 5,200, and my guy Tank Dell all have over 20% ownership. Nico Collins didn't practice today, which is a positive for Tank Dell. But boy, all three of those are tough for me. I don't like playing guys who are injured, but if I'm going to play one of those three into chalk, it's going to be Jamar Chase because he's one of the best wide receivers in football. But that comes with some risk. T. Higgins looks like he's out. CD Lamb is well under 20%, as I guess people are thinking that the Cowboys are going to blow out the Giants and Tommy DeVito. They probably will. But if he gets into single digits, right now he's about 15% ownership on Lamb anyway. I think that's going to be way lower. I think that people are just not going to want to play Lamb against the Giants. And if you can get him down 5-7%, then I want to be over. If not, I might not have any CD Lamb this week at 15%. Jahan Dotson woke up last week with Curtis Samuel out, and I like him again at 5,000. His running mate, Terry McLaurin, also still in the 5,000s. It's a pretty good matchup, and that goes back to why I might like playing some Howell this week. A tighter distribution with Samuel out. I have not seen that he's coming back for this week. Both Jaguars wide receivers have lower ownership and merit further looks as we go later in the week. And then my favorite play of the week, you picked him as a prop. I'm picking him as my DFS play of the week. Hopkins at 6,000 against Tampa. Right now he's under 20%. I mean, he would have to go 30% for me to start losing interest in him. Right now, I could see myself going 40, 50, 60% Hopkins and just being way over on the field. And my deep sleeper this week, if it is true that T. Higgins misses and Chase plays but is kind of banged up, Andre Iosivas is a guy who was very raw coming out of Princeton. But on tape, he kind of had a little bit of Puka Nacua to me. And I think he's a talented guy. And, if he's going to be 1% owned, Higgins being out and Chase being banged up, I think he's the one guy on that team who could step in and have a really big week. Your thoughts on him at 3,000 if Higgins misses and the other guys that I spoke of?
Yeah, if Higgins is out, it definitely makes sense to throw a dart at, I believe it's pronounced Iosivas, if I got that correctly, Andre Iosivas. It makes sense because his strength is stretching the field. He's still learning in a lot of other areas of the game. He's the guy that came out of Princeton, so didn't play at a high level. He's really just sort of an athletic freak that has the size and speed to stretch the field, and that's the one thing you can trust him to do right now. He doesn't have great fundamentals in other areas, but with him stepping in for Higgins specifically, that's probably okay because that's a big part of what Higgins does is stretch the field. He often sees those downfield targets. He sees them although Chase sees slightly more downfield targets than Higgins sees a much higher percentage of downfield targets. So Iosivas stepping into that role, it seems doable. And with his salary down at the basement, it's absolutely worth targeting if he's filling in for Higgins. Another guy you mentioned, Lamb. I think that Lamb and Pollard, as you get closer to the week, I think the way to approach that would make sense is see what everybody else is doing, who has the higher roster share, and go to the other guy. Because against the Giants, seems like a pretty high probability that at least one of them is going to have a big game, right? A bad defense. The Giants are also not going to have any offense. But can we really pick who it's going to be between the two of them? It could be either of them. It could also be both. But if you're going to pick one or the other, I would just go with wait until Sunday and see who has the lower roster share and go with that guy, because one of those guys is going to put up some numbers, I would think.
I didn't hear who the second guy you mentioned was.
Lamb versus Pollard.
Oh, okay. Well,
one of those guys is going to have a big game,
third
right?
one, and that's Jake Ferguson, who's up to 4,600. and I'll kind of jump ahead to tight end here.
Yeah, go for it.
He wasn't on my list, but I think even in a game where they're winning, I think Ferguson is going to be out there, and I think he's interesting. The Right now, though, we're looking at some crazy chalk at tight end. Hawkinson, McBride, and Ingram all showing close to 30%. I find it very hard to play tight ends into that kind of ownership. And hold on one sec. I'm sorry. Wait till your kids start texting you in the middle of your podcast, Ryan. So I'm going to have a hard time being even or over on any of them, especially with Kirk and Ridley's ownership being really in. I got to do a deeper dive as to why. I understand McBride and I understand Hawkinson. Ingram doesn't make a lot of sense to me right now. So I need to, look into is it a great tight end matchup? Is there something going on there? I'll throw out a couple really interesting names though at tight end. One is Irv Smith. So again, back to the proposition that someone's got to catch the ball and your top two wide receivers are injured. Irv Smith last week had, he came off the injured list. He was out on the field a lot, didn't get targets. He's starting to get targets. He had 3 catches for 26 yards and a touchdown last week. His salary is incredibly low. I think Irv Smith is really interesting as a leverage play this week if Burrow and Chase end up being chalk. If Drake London misses again, Jonnu Smith at 3,600. I was over last week, but not enough. I don't think the guy's going away anywhere. And I mean, did you see him on that long run last week? I mean, he was burning rubber. And the last name I'll throw out there right now, George Kittle has no ownership. And I haven't seen finally, but it looked to me like Debo was going to be back. Kittle splits when Debo and Ayuk are both playing are way down from when one of them is out. But that being said, he's still George Kittle. He can still break a slate. He's one of those guys that, if I can get him at the current 2% ownership, I'm going to be way over and hope to get lucky because that's one way to really separate from the field, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, your logic on Kittle absolutely makes sense. Even with those splits, that's going to be the reason why he doesn't have a huge roster share this week. But in that matchup, you also have 2 competent offenses, and we don't have very many of those around the league in any given week. And so it's clearly shootout potential. And so even if his usage is a little bit lower, if that game does turn into a shootout, he has the potential to put up a big game. So that's certainly, it's certainly a useful way to use that low roster share to your advantage, I would think. And then, I mean, just sort of big picture, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I haven't updated the numbers on it, but we talked about how with scoring down across the league this year, all of the good fantasy games from tight ends are coming from that top tier guys, right? So it's almost like if you go dumpster diving at tight end, you're chasing touchdowns usually, right? Because no one down there is getting good usage. And if there's fewer touchdowns scored across the league week after week, like we've seen this season, the odds of you picking the right guy is just pretty low. So yeah, it seems like this continues to be a trend where, even though I don't have a strong take on which of the chalky tight ends to go with, it does seem like you almost have to go that route, is to pick one of the more highly targeted tight ends in the league and just sort of ride it and hope that you catch them on their best week.
Well, if that's the case, Sam Laporta right now only has 10% ownership. He is in the 5,700s. He's not cheap. I typically don't like to play pass game options of Detroit on the road because Jared Goff's splits are so bad, home versus road. But it is a good matchup versus the Chargers. So Sam Laporta could also be interesting if if Ryan's logic is your logic. Ryan, I really appreciate the feedback on my early thoughts. I appreciate you going out on the limb every week with these props. I wish you great luck with them this week. I hope that you get all of them right. And don't forget, everyone, that we are giving discounts on all our content at Sharp Football. 15% off. Use the code ANGLES. You can use it on the website. You can use it wherever it comes up. We really appreciate your support. We appreciate you listening to this show. And Ryan and I will be back for week 11 next week. Thanks so much. And Ryan, you have a great week.